Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our session on reducing food waste. Thank you very much for joining, and thank you to all our expert panel here. I'll very briefly say who I am. I'm a board member for Zero Waste Scotland, and when I'm not doing that, I run a small holding in Dumfries and Galloway. So in terms of food waste, you know, I'm lucky enough to have plenty of space for compost bins, 8 at the last count, for all my vegetable and fruit food waste. Just in terms of the focus of the discussion, I'll ask the panel to introduce themselves in a moment, and you've got the bios you can click on online to get further details. So they're going to very briefly just say what their particular expertise is on food waste, but then I want to spend the time on the discussion really. And the topic is particularly around household food waste, because the research that Zero Waste Scotland has put together that's on the platform there is that 70% of the UK's food waste is actually attributed to households. So it's what we all waste in our own homes. So let's focus on that in the discussion this afternoon, if that's all right. And I'm struck by the facts, you know, 20 million slices of bread every day we waste. I mean, it's just doesn't bear thinking about really. 280 tons of poultry and 4.4 million tatties. So, you know, let's put our heads together and share some thoughts on how we can reduce those ridiculous figures. So that's me. If I hand over now to Richard, if you'd like to tell us what your particular expertise is around food waste, please.
Well, thank you, Helen, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to you all today. So my name is Richard Swannell. I'm International Director at WRAP, and I started work on food waste back in 2005 when we put together the first voluntary agreement in the world, actually, on tackling packaging and food waste reduction. And that's called the Courtauld Commitment, which has just actually been extended to 2030 to actually combine with the target of halving food loss and waste by 2030. I also was instrumental in setting up the Love Food, Hate Waste campaign, and indeed actually looking at working with the hospitality and food service sector at reducing food loss and waste. And now I'm actually working to try and take some of the learnings that's happened in Scotland and across the UK and across Europe to other countries around the world. And I'm currently working with partners in 40 countries, particularly tackling packaging and food loss and waste.
Thank you, Richard. Nadiya, British Retail Consortium, do you want to tell us what your particular expertise is around food waste, please?
Thank you, Helen. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nadiya Catel, and I'm the Sustainability Policy Advisor at the British Retail Consortium. For those who are not familiar with the BRC, we are the leading trade association representing the retail industry in the UK. And in Scotland, we are present through the Scottish Retail Consortium. So I will be representing the food retail businesses this afternoon, and my experience in the circular economy started with a first job at Veolia in Brussels and London. So obviously I have experience in the food sort of management aspect of things, but also now higher up in the supply chain with retail.
Thank you, Nadiya. And Iain, you want to, I know you've got loads of expertise on this, so what particular angle would you like questions on today?
Thanks very much for setting me up to fail there, Helen. So my name's Iain Black. I'm a Professor of Sustainable Consumption at the University of Stirling. My particular background is a consumer researcher, a consumer psychologist, very much on behaviour change and the barriers to behaviour change. So that's where I've come from. But as the sustainability crisis continues to get worse, I'm more interested or more focusing now on the limitations to behaviour change as a frame, and focusing more on the other part of the question here, which is food systems, or in particularly systems. In the system that we're working in here, the food system that we're working in here at the moment is working perfectly according to what it's set up to do. And that we cannot address, the behaviours will change easily if we address the goals of the system, and the goal of the system being growth and GDP growth and greater volume. So I'd like to be able to give you some examples down at the behavioural level of what we can do, but try to frame the discussion much more broadly into the systems and systems change that we require and how to do that.
Thanks, Iain. Well, I'm sure we'll come back to that in the questions. And finally, Andy, would you like to share what your area of expertise is, please?
Thanks, Helen, and it's a real pleasure to be here. So I'm Head of Value Chain Sustainability for all of Nestlé's businesses in the UK and Ireland. So basically responsible for all of our development and delivery strategy. As part of that, food loss and waste is obviously a very critical component where we've been driving real change from an operational perspective and also now more broadly across the value chain, working closely with organisations like RAP. So I sit on RAP's Catel steering group, and then also with other parts of the food system. So for example, the redistribution, food redistribution organisations, and also partners looking at how we can influence consumer behaviour on food loss and waste as well.
Thank you all very much. So we've got some quite different perspectives there, and so it should make for a good discussion. Now, to kick us off, because we had some questions in advance, and the first one probably plays to you, Iain, what you've already said. What will it take to redesign the food system and turn it into a circular food economy, like other sectors that are now focusing more on circular models, designing products and services that close the loop and minimise waste? So this is looking at, I know it's a massive topic, so just share a few sort of practical things maybe to kick off the debate, Iain, on changing the food system.
So I think if I'll maybe start, if you just want the top ones here, I think that we need to think about how you change systems. And the first thing, so working a lot around Donella Meadows' notion of leverage points in systems. The most important thing about a system is its goal. And the difficulty that we've got is that we're having enormous difficulty getting people thinking about the possibility of changing the goal. So GDP growth, exploitative GDP growth is the goal of our economic system. It's the goal of our food system. And when we speak to policymakers and when we speak within organizations, it is very, very difficult for them to think of anything else. They look for the solutions within that existing system. So if we need to change a system, you need to change its goals. And so what sits even further above that is getting people to think that there is a possibility. So it's the ability to have heretical thinking within their organizations. What does it mean for a product manager within Nestle who turns around and says, no, I'm going to make less money this year?
So, well, that set you up. Andy,
okay, so
what would your goal be? Sorry, Iain, I talk across you there. Do finish. No.
So absolutely, satisficing. Enough, arrival, sharing, prosperity. So we set these different goals. So wonderful book by Catherine Trebeck a couple of years ago looked at the economics of arrival to say actually in Scotland, we have more than enough. What we don't have is an equal distribution of that enough. And to stop striving for more and more and ever more when that brings from a system that is already producing too much waste. It is already using up the resources of the world to great an extent. So adding even more it's kind of magical thinking. So these notions of satisficing, we've had enough. The joy of spreading and participation.
Satisficing. So I like that. Thank you, Iain. Andy, so what would the goal be for Nestlé, if that's something you can share with us in terms of the food production for your business?
Absolutely. So it's about transforming to sustainable food systems. And I think that's crucial. Obviously, our food systems have an impact on the natural environment, to Iain's point, both from a nature and from a climate perspective, but also those food systems are critically impacted by climate change and the decline in the state of nature. So if we're going to drive successful business models in the future, then we need sustainable food systems, and we need to understand how we transform to those. Similar to Iain, being a manufacturing engineer by trade, I come very much from the systems thinking perspective, and it really is about how we unpack that. And I think the goals element is one key element, but really helping organisations to take a step back, apply that systems thinking, but also think about some of the more straightforward routes through in terms of delivering the outcomes we need to see is crucial. And if you look at a bit of a shameless plug here, the UNEP Geo for Business briefing that came out recently, the role of business in transforming food systems, that really recognise the complexity of our food systems, but also try to shine a light on some key themes, almost no regrets themes, that businesses, no matter where they are on the journey, can lean into to drive real change. And one of the core themes within that was tackling food loss and waste.
So could you give us an example of something tangible that either Nestlé or from one of the other businesses involved in that partnership have done or are doing or intend to do?
Yeah,
Would change the
absolutely.
system?
Yeah, so I think there are two, one specific to food loss and waste itself, one more broadly. So if you looked at regenerative agriculture, the bulk of food businesses, their footprint will sit in their agricultural supply, so typically between 70 and 95%. So clearly, if we're going to drive that change, we need to focus on how we support our farmers and land managers to deliver that change. And there are a range of practices that can be delivered in field, but again, addressing food loss in field is a key element of achieving that. So looking at how we can do that to reduce the load on those resources, so on that land use, water use, etc. And then more broadly, food loss and waste. So businesses really looking at, in the first instance, their own operation, identifying where those wastes sit. Typically, most businesses will view or take a view that they're probably in good control. We all like to think so, but actually when you start to scrape under the surface, there are plenty of opportunities, and I believe the more you look, the more you can find. So really looking at where you are, setting a target, so whether it's in line with Champions 12.3, SDG 12.3, for example, and then measuring performance against that target. And by doing that, you provide real clarity, real focus on where the issues and opportunities are. And the benefit of that approach is not only does it deliver real environmental benefit, but actually, same with all resource efficiency-based propositions, it delivers real value for the business. You're taking cost out of the business, which is to benefit of all.
Yes, sure. So it's actually have economic benefits as
Absolutely.
well. It's not a win-lose really,
Yeah.
is it? No. Nadiya, from a retail point of view, is there anything you'd like to add in terms of the food system from your members' perspective?
I think I could. I agree with what's been said previously. Perhaps just to add a couple of things is that we definitely need sustained collective efforts in this exercise to change the system. We need the consumers' backup, but we also need the government support. I think for sure retailers want to see more circularity, and they are innovating constantly, offering resource efficient systems and products. So I think there's a lot of things that are happening in terms of innovation. But I also think that fundamentally we need government backup, and this is where I think the circularity bill, the Scottish circularity bill, is going to be essential to get it right. So, for example, there is something that in Scotland that is not addressed yet, which is the discrepancy in the collections of food waste. I think this is something that would greatly benefit the entire system, but also, and most importantly, the householders. We definitely need to increase and improve and harmonize those collections. And building up on that, it's not just about the capturing of the materials. It's also about having the reprocessing infrastructure in place, where that food waste is actually never waste. It's a secondary raw resource that is captured and then reprocessed into high quality compost.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, I can see Richard nodding there from a RAP perspective too. Is there anything, just before we move on, Nadiya, that you think the retail sector itself can do in terms of how they present things in shops, for example, that helps the consumer to have, to achieve a lower waste in their own households?
Absolutely. I think there's probably a figure that you've all heard, is that the food waste in retail operations is only 2%, and that's because retailers have undertaken a lot of efforts and actions to reduce that waste in stores. But simultaneously, they're also offering solutions for the consumers, advising on how best to cook, under what sort of temperatures to, save the food. And also a lot of things are happening in terms of redistribution of surplus of food in stores. I think this year alone, there's been millions of meals redistributed with fair share. And I think RAP's latest figures around food waste redistribution shows that between 2015 and 2020, the food redistribution tripled. So I think retailers have played a massive role in achieving that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Richard, do you want to add anything around the food systems question?
Yes, please, Helen, if I may. I mean, I just wanted to draw a sort of global perspective here. I mean, recent research by both UNEP and by FAO showed there's well over 30% of all food produced on the planet is thrown away. So that's the scale of the challenge. If we're genuinely serious about a circular economy in food, we've got to transform the food system right across that. And I'd say the heart of that is that every morsel of food needs to go to a productive outcome. Now, that might be, first of all, making sure it gets to somebody who needs it. 800 million people on the planet go to bed every night hungry. So there's a challenge there immediately. But also, there is, at this stage, we're actually taking food, right across the world and actually dropping it into landfill sites where it produces methane, which is another potent greenhouse gas. Clearly, that's madness if we are genuinely going to actually address climate change. So what we've got to think about is less inputs all the way through, no waste, take everything to a productive outcome, and also making sure that we get as much food to those in need as we need. As Iain said, we need an equitable food system as well as an efficient and a low carbon food system. And just to give you an example, so people often say, well, yeah, let's capture it and put it into compost and digestate. And Nadiya, I agree with you on that. But actually, there's much added value markets to think about. The classic is Marmite, brewer's grain, turning into a high added value. You may not like it, but by God, it's a decent product. And another great one is taking waste from the milk industry and using it as a feedstock for vodka production. So there is a vodka that's produced in the UK that is produced exclusively from the waste from milk industry, and there's even a beer made from wasted bread. So we can add value, we can do things differently. But what we shouldn't be doing is chucking things into landfill, and we should make sure that we capture everything, and at the very least compost it or put it through anaerobic digestion and get it back to soils so that we can help grow the next generation of crops. So it's really food system transformation that's at the heart of this.
Well, that's set the bar high, Richard. Thank you for that. So very passionate intervention there. And that brings us on nicely, actually, to the next question. Sorry, not the new question, the next question, slightly different angle, which is about behaviour change. So are we doing enough to understand what's behind the behaviours of householders when it comes to wasting food at home, and how do we drive change? It does lend itself to your area again, Iain. So if you don't mind, I'll start with you, and then next time I'll start with somebody else first on the next question. But it's about, so there is things being done. We've already heard at retail and the food production end, but householders are still got an important role to play in what we actually have bought or have in our fridges and in our cupboards at home. So how can we change behaviours in terms of what we all do at home?
So I think this kind of falls into the same category the UN and the governments of the world have been grappling with, that we need to listen to the science, okay? But we actually need to listen to the social science here about behaviour change. We have got enormous and copious amounts of research done from evolutionary psychology, the basis of behaviour, the things that you have to work with because they're hardwired into our brains, all the way through to the cultural elements that we can change over time. We've got a very, very good understanding of why we waste and what from the system down, why we waste that as human beings. We get an evolutionary perspective of what diets we look towards. So we've got nice complementary understandings there. We've got a very good idea of what marketing tactics work. I mean, marketing's so powerful that we can get you to buy for a couple of pounds a product that comes out of a tap for free and tastes great. We are truly remarkable. Just give us the budget. Just give us the budget and get out of the way, and we can do amazing things. So we have copious amounts of research that we know how to implement. People like Barbara Rolls has done 100 studies, probably actually near 1,000 studies on portion size and what we can do about the way that the food viscosity, etc., in order to make us eat less and still feel full. How we can reduce our portion size. So we almost, I hate to say this as an academic, we almost don't need any more of that research. What we need is a structure where that research can be implemented and not be fought against by all the other issues, etc. So we have, on one hand, the understanding of marketing, and on the other hand, when we go into the store, because they also understand marketing, we've got all these volume-based discounts. And we're using MRI
scan. Buy one, get one free type of thing.
We're using MRI scanners now to watch the parts of people's brains light up when we show them stimulus. So we can work exactly about what those colours and what those noises have to be, the crunch in your mouth, etc., in order to stimulate and stop rational thinking. That's an important part of rational.
Sorry, Iain. No, I was just going to ask you: is there an example of a lever, a positive lever, that would have the effect we want, which is to reduce the waste in people's homes?
So I think we can go to controlling marketing here, just as we did with volume discounts, volume in alcohol. We do that with food as well. We could use tax disincentives if we allow bulk buying. It's great for the consumer, but it speeds up consumption rates. So we have to, there's application around, unfortunately for my discipline, controlling the use of marketing, because there's lots of really brilliant scientists out there understanding human behavior and how to manipulate it. And that comes through into the modern retail environment where you walk in and it's just brilliant at selling you things. And sumptuous. So I think we have to accept that there is control over the types of offer that are had and the volume discounts. But the more important things, the much more important things, are about structuring in the institutions around being able to walk to your stores safely, to have local solutions, to have local, a multifaceted high street with where local SMEs are able to find space on the shelves. So there are the behavioural, but we are stopped by the institutional level changes that are issues that are around. Sorry, I couldn't quite pronounce that.
Yeah. Okay. Richard, you were nodding when I asked about positive levers. Did you have something in your mind there that you'd like to share?
Yeah, absolutely, Helen. And I think one of the interesting things about this, just the first issue is globally, when you ask people whether they waste food, they say, no, I don't waste food. It's somebody else must waste food. And we look, 70% of all the food waste in the UK comes from the home. So crikey, what's happening there? So just building on Iain's point, we understand the behaviours that are behind this. But firstly, when we're trying to change those behaviours, we need to be really, really clear what we want people to do, and then use marketing and retail and manufacturers to help support that. And building on that point of making sure, so do we need buy one, get one free on perishable? Well, the answer is no, we don't. And actually, they're nearly completely gone from UK supermarkets. You have price promotions for sure. Instead of getting 2 packs of carrots for the same price as one, you get a half price offer. You actually see things like resealable packs that help us actually make the best use of the food that we buy. So that there are much clearer date labels, but also helping us in the home make the best use of our leftovers, actually store things in the right place. These are all behaviours that we know actually help people reduce food waste. And through things like the Love Food, Hate Waste campaign, and indeed through Quartile commitment in support of that, retailers and manufacturers are helping citizens now reduce food waste in the home. And that has worked because we've reduced food waste in the UK by 31% per person. Probably the best in the world in that respect.
Oh, well, that's encouraging. It's nice to have some good news, yeah. And Nadiya,
well, we need to get to 50, Helen. You see that?
Yeah, I know. It's not enough, but it's going in the right direction, is what I'm trying to say there. Nadiya, did you want to add something? I could see by your face you've got different thoughts going through your mind there. So.
So it's a really interesting conversation. I think I definitely agree that this is a massive challenge. We know that engaging with customers is crucial because as Richard said, 70% of food waste is in the home. So there are a lot of measures that, brands, manufacturers, retailers can put in place. Some of them will work, some of them won't work, but I think it's about, the determination to innovate and experiment and find ways to reduce waste. I think it's also enabling the customers to do the right thing, and absolutely retailers have a role to inform, to encourage, to enable customers to make better and easier choices. And I think we need to take them on this journey with us, because if we don't, then we're not going to reach that circular food system nor the net zero. So I think it's really important having that engagement.
You mentioned you mentioned earlier, I think, that something about giving advice on how to use different products. So I don't know if you're thinking about things like how to make soup out of vegetables that may have gone past their best eating fresh, that kind of thing. I'm just interested what's the take up of that kind of advice? What's the risk, if you know of any response from shoppers?
I think more generally it's welcome. It's welcomed by people. I think there's a lot of information around how to consume, how can you repurpose the food, how can you also freeze that food even if it's arriving to what people could think a critical date, and then you can eat it at a later stage. So all of that information, and obviously the staff is trained, of course, to advise on that. Something that I also wanted to say is that that relates to COVID is that we went through a phase where people were in their homes. A lot of people, bought food, but I think it's important also to understand that there's been a lot of food saving habits that we learned during the pandemic, and I think moving forward we really need to preserve that mentality of food waste saving habits moving forward.
Yeah, no, that's good. And it leads on actually to a question that came in online, which was to say, what is there I'm just finding it here, what everyday good advice on how to reduce food waste in the home? So any tips from anyone here that you'd like to share that we could all adopt in our own home to help reduce food waste every day? You mentioned freezing, Nadiya. Anybody else like to chip in with something?
So Helen, a couple of things from my side. I mean, at its basic, it is buy what you need and eat what you buy. It's as fundamental as that, and I think fundamentally that's what Iain was saying when he was introducing this. But there are simple hints and tips. I mean, the one in my household, which is I use quite a lot, is if I've got any veg that are coming towards the end of its, or fruit that's coming to the end of its useful life, I love a smoothie. Whisk it up in a smoothie, chuck it in the fridge. It's wonderful as part of the breakfast the next day. And don't forget, the freezer is your friend here. If going up, you can actually freeze the vast majority of products right up to midnight on the use by date. So if you're looking through your fridge and think, oh, crikey, what have I got here? It can go straight in the freezer, and exactly as Nadiya says, it can then be used at a later date.
Yeah, well, I've got one I do is with crusts of bread or bits of bread that are left and the loaves, I know I'm not going to eat it and it'll start going mouldy. I just cut it into squares and bung it in a bag in the freezer. And it's great then if I'm having a soup, you can just toast them from frozen in a dry frying pan. So I've always got some croutons to have in the soup. So there's one from me for nothing. Andy, have you got one there?
Yeah, there's probably a couple for me. So one is, you talked about freezing there, but also refrigerators. We assume they're all running at the right temperature. Many of them now actually tell you what temperature they're running at, but a lot still don't. So checking whether it's actually set at the optimal temperature, and if you need a thermometer to do that, then getting a fridge thermometer can definitely make a big difference. Also looking at what products should be stored where. And again, WRAP have some great resources identifying what's most appropriate to be stored in which locations. Some are what you would think are obvious. There are many actually which are quite a surprise, and I'm sure most of us are storing half our food in the wrong place at the moment in terms of trying to ensure its longevity. So that's really crucial. And then I think also when we're talking about reusing leftovers, actually starting to look for opportunities to enhance as well. I mean, a great tip that I got from my gran actually, which is broccoli stalks. If you use them in pea soups, it actually makes the pea soup taste like peas. We always struggle to get a pea soup to taste like peas, but you put broccoli stalks in and it makes a world of difference.
I'll try that, Andy. Thank you for that. That's a good one. Anybody else got one quickly? Yeah, go on, Iain.
Can I just say, don't go to supermarkets. Don't do a weekly shop at a supermarket. You know, and without trying to trivialize this thing, the suggestions here are so far away from dealing with those figures that we were talking about at the very beginning. It's so Sean Locke, the brilliant comedian, used to just talk about what his cleaning of glass bottles for the recycling. It felt like he was turning up to the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina in the States with a dustpan and brush and saying, "Can I help?" And that's
it's not at the right scale. You mean it's not at the right level?
So, and I'd also like to say is that we're it. Yeah. If we don't get this right by 2030, we're on to 3 degrees. So if we frame these discussions around the trivial and the small, and don't deal with the big issues that again the social sciences understands and what the thinkers that will make the change, then we're part of the problem.
No, I take your point, but it doesn't stop you still. Instead, I take your point, but I still instead of throwing my crusts of bread in the bin, I'll still cut them into squares and put them in the freezer. It doesn't mean it's wrong to do it, does it? It's just that I completely take your point. It's not enough. It's not going to be the game changer that we need. And that comes on to the next question, which is about how we can get change at pace. Before I do that, Nadiya, I think you had a tip to share. I didn't want to cut you off. So very quickly.
Yes, very much. I think I'd like to build up on Iain's point, though. It's a quite bold statement, Iain, and absolutely, you know, we do support, you know, local shopping and encourage local productions. However, I'd like to highlight that during the pandemic, supermarkets actually provide an essential service to this country. You know, people were relying on the food on supermarkets, and I think we, to some extent, we still are. You know, just looking at the news of different shortages. So I think so that's, you know, it's important to remember that role, that we're supporting the economy, but also that there is a competing tension that is happening between sustainability commitments, individual price and convenience. And I think retailers are trying as hard as they can to bring all of that together. And make it available to everyone. And in terms of tips, I'd say from I would say my younger years, I'm not that old, but something that I used to do quite a lot and I'm still doing is relying on the yellow stickers. There's a lot of reductions happening in store, and that food is 100% of good quality and can be consumed on the day or in the next couple of days. So not be afraid of actually buying something that has that yellow sticker, which will, you know, you'll save some money and you're also buying some food and that you'll consume. So it's a win-win.
Yeah, good one. Thank you. Right. Well, next question. Where in the world is changing food waste behaviours at pace? What are they doing right? What can we learn from them? Richard, that might be one for you, given your global links there.
Yeah, thank you, Helen. And it is worthwhile saying that actually, when you look around the world, there was quite a lot of activity, but relatively few countries that have delivered real impact. Where they have, they've done it with a well thought through behavioural change campaign that actually drives that change. So it's taking all of the advice we just discussed and packaging it up in something that operates at a population level. So to give you an idea, in the Netherlands, they've managed to help reduce food waste by 27% per person, 27% per person. In the UK, as I've already said, it's 31%. Now that's 1.4 million tonnes less food every single year that is being thrown away. That 1.4 million tonnes would actually make 4 billion meals and feed the UK population for 3 meals a day for 2 months. So these aren't trivial interventions. Denmark has also seen reductions of around 10%, and we're now seeing campaigns in Canada, in Australia, and indeed even Saudi Arabia have got a campaign which is looking at food waste. So we're beginning to see it, but is it enough? No, by no means. I mean, we need many more countries, and one of the things that the Food Waste Index report that UNEP published earlier on this year showed is that actually household food waste in the home is actually roughly the same level across the world, from lower middle income countries, higher middle income countries, and developed countries. They've all got roughly the same amount of food waste in the home. So it really is a global challenge. But do we know how to do it? Yeah, I think we can change populations. I think we can reduce food waste. And the evidence is the leading countries are doing it.
And when you say the leading countries are doing it, I'm just interested in, particularly with COP26 coming up, which is the reason behind us doing this event today. Who is leading it in the countries that are leading the way? Is it the governments? Is it the third sector? Is it business? Who's sort of driving those campaigns?
Yeah, so as part of the UN Food Systems Summit, RAP was one of the organisations that worked together on this whole idea of what would it take to actually move towards a sustainable food system in terms of food waste. We came up with this thing called "Food is Never Waste," that was actually highlighted at the UN Food Systems Summit. And critical to that is engaging governments. To answer your question directly, I think having governments working with businesses, as you've got in Scotland at the moment, very close relationships between retailers and brands, and indeed the government with a focus saying we're going to halve food waste by 2030. That's what we're going to do. And we're going to try things, and not everything's going to work, but we're going to try things. And I think that sort of partnership between the public sector and the private sector is key, because when there are barriers to actually getting these things done. So, for example, there were barriers to redistribution of food associated with the understanding of date labels. So, one thing that RAP did with BRC and indeed with the Food Standards Agency is come up with new guidance during COVID-19 in order to be able to get more food safely to those who needed it. It's that type of thing that we absolutely need to replicate in as many countries as we can around the world. So, yeah, I think it's that partnership approach, and it's backed up by regulatory change in order to make it as easy as possible to drive that change.
But Andy, you're here from big corporate, so what's your view? Partnerships between big business or business of any size and governments, is that the way forward?
It is. I mean, I think if you look at the transformation that's been achieved, for example, in the UK, that has come about to a large extent through a combination of the Catel programme, but also the UK Food Waste Roadmap, where a whole range of businesses have come together to take action on food waste, both in terms of setting a target, measuring it, but also reporting publicly around that as well. And that's critically important in two respects. One is it helps businesses to understand the importance themselves and take action within their own operation and ultimately across their own value chain. So not just within their, the battery footprint, but looking upstream in terms of agricultural supply and downstream in terms of consumers. But the other really important thing for me, and we tend to forget about this, is we employ consumers, as we all do sat here today. And actually, if we can influence our own employees to help them understand, first of all, the value of food, is critical. Part of the reason why food is wasted is because perhaps some of us don't fully appreciate the value of food. Secondly, why is it personal to me? What difference can I make? And then actually providing that understanding, that recognition as to what are the practical actions I can take. And some of that is then about those individuals taking those practices, those learnings into their own homes. Some of it is acting as advocates for change in the communities within which they live, their friends, their family, but then also starting to reshape some of the other thinking. So I agree with Iain, some broad brushed behavioural insights, but there's also some specific ones to food waste, and probably one of the ones that hasn't been referenced today is around date labelling. So we can make a massive difference, and this comes about through confusion. It's not really behaviour, it's just that people don't understand what they're supposed to do. So in the first instance, if you can get rid of sell-by dates, then do. If you can't, then looking at use-by dates, if you can, completely great. If you need a use by date, fine. But then with that use by date, using kind of models a bit like the look, smell, taste, don't waste. So encouraging people to use their own senses before they just go and throw it in the bin. Those simple but really impactful changes can make a real difference to people and the food that they waste. So for me, business thinking about employees first as consumers, changing their behaviours and their understanding, and then using that to help change the understanding, awareness and behaviours of others is a critical element, as well as the changes we can make practically within our own supply chains.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's another different angle, isn't it? Thinking about the people who work in our organisations. Yeah. Anybody else? Because it's kind of leading on to another question we had, is who is responsible for driving the behaviour change? So which is why I was asking that question. Iain,
can I jump in on the last one, Helen? Would that be all right?
Yes, go on.
Yeah. So sorry, couple of things in here. So Nadiya, retail, and I'm talking retailing, is a glue in a society. So glue in a absolutely vital role in keeping communities. When communities lose a shop, their last shop, they collapse. So I fully understand the importance of retailing. There's different forms of retail, of course. I think, Helen, part of the question here is I can tell you when in the world these things happened, and when in the world was in the 1970s and earlier, when we all understood a vegetarian diet on the whole, when we, most of us didn't eat meat twice a day, we maybe ate it a couple of times a week, etc. So there, and we understood, my grandparents, my parents absolutely understood circular economy. It was just everything that was done. And so what we're living in now is in the anomaly. Humans understand circularity, but it's been taken away from us. I think where in the world, when you look at those countries that are highly equal, so that one of there's equality written in, that comes from a very local level of democracy, a local level of control. So when the retailing environment within that area can be under local control to the local situation, it's not dominated by a few players. Because when we get to a situation where, Nadiya, and I'm using statistics from Nestle here, when an individual food manufacturer can have more carbon emissions than a country the size of the Czech Republic, then that system is broken. And that the retailers have to use their power, as I was taught in the 1990s, the retailers have all the power here to choice edit and say to Andy and Nestle, you've done your baseline analysis of your carbon. You've made these, and I don't want to say, you've made these claims that you're going to stop chopping down forests. Okay, we'll take you at your word, but after 3 years, if you've not made good progress, no, you don't. You lose some shelf space. And what we do is we look to some of those more local manufacturers, those BMEs who struggle for shelf space across, and bring them in. So the retailers have a fundamental role here in ensuring that we move forward, and we don't get caught in what Ed Miliband is going around at the moment calling the happy talk. But we all talk about our targets, we talk about some action, but what we're all, there's targets, there's action, but that's not important anymore. It's effective action that's important.
Absolutely.
Okay?
And there's lots of, we've had some good examples, some good sources where people can look up some of these references, and they'll be available through the Zero Waste Scotland website on the platform after the event. We've only got a couple of minutes, I can see on my countdown clock here, so we could go on all day about this fascinating discussion. There's so much to say. I would encourage people to look on the website to read more about it. Before I close the session, I'm going to give each of you you've got about half a minute. Any final thoughts? Nadiya, I'll start with you.
I think we definitely need to increase food waste prevention and maximize food waste reduction as much as possible in the next decade and so on, to deliver on to make the circular food economy happen and deliver the net zero commitments.
Thank you. Andy from Nestlé, what any final thoughts?
Absolutely. I think size can be a benefit in terms of leveraging and driving real change. And I think if you look, for example, for us, I genuinely believe the more you look, the more you find. We achieved zero waste for disposal back in 2015, reduced the amount of waste streams going to energy from waste by 70%, and yet we've still managed to reduce our food waste across our operational footprint in the UK and Ireland by 41% since 2016. So you can deliver real action if you focus on it. Very much to Iain's point, deliver outcomes, don't just talk.
Absolutely. Richard?
Yeah, just building on that, I think, well, we'll start off with food is never waste. Let's make every scrap of food that we produce on the planet and put it to good use. That's absolutely key. And we can do it if we all go away from listening to this today and actually make those changes in the home. The croutons example, Helen, making a list before you go shopping, putting stuff in the freezer rather than throwing it away if it's close to its use by date. All those things add up. You know, we have reduced food waste by 31% in the UK. That's in Scotland, that's in England, that's in Wales, that's in Northern Ireland. We can all, by making these changes, make a big difference. So let's do it.
Absolutely. And Iain, final word from you.
GDP growth is the first, second, third, fourth, and fifth reason why we're in the environmental crisis that we have. And we need to imagine a system of satisfying enough and sharing. And we can do that through pricing signals, and we can do that through media understanding and asking the right questions. But primarily, we've got to do that not in our role as consumers, but our role as citizens. The governments are not acting in enough detail, enough speed. And it is not our role as consumers, our role as citizens to take back, get the control into local spaces, local democracy, where we're able to put the systems in place where we can bring our environmental impact down. It is up to us as our role as citizens to change the system.
Thank you. So we've all got our part to play. I would sum up, and the time's up. But thank you ever so much for all your time and all your contributions. Thank you.
Thank you.